Have you ever noticed how, after some big new law gets passed or a super strict rule is put in place, the problem it was supposed to fix, well, it doesn't really go away? It's a pretty common frustration, right? And it all comes down to this simple but totally flawed idea that if you change the rules, people's behavior will just neatly fall in line. Well, today, we're going to dig into why that's a myth. Okay, so let's start with what I like to call the tidy model of policy. It feels so logical, doesn't it? You see a problem, you make a rule to stop it, you enforce the rule, and poof, behavior changes, problem solved. It's a really comforting way to think because it makes us feel like things are under control, like our leaders have a clear, responsible plan. But here's where this beautiful theory just crashes headfirst into reality. See this neat little 5-step plan? It often falls apart completely. And the reason is actually pretty simple. People aren't pieces on a chessboard. We don't just move where we're told. We adapt, we find workarounds, we interpret the rules in ways the people who wrote them never, ever saw coming. So first, let's spend a little more time with this tidy model. This really tempting but ultimately flawed idea that we can just neatly control what people do. The real trouble is this model treats human behavior like it's a simple light switch. You just flip it from on to off. But it's never that simple, is it? People are way more complex. We react based on our own situations, our own needs, and frankly, our own creativity. Assuming everyone's going to react the exact same way to a new rule, well, that's the first and biggest mistake. So how does this actually play out? Next up, let's trace the life cycle of an issue. How a totally reasonable concern can start to snowball, gather speed, and turn into a full-blown moral panic that demands somebody do something right now. You know, most of these massive public debates, they don't start with some big, crazy event. They usually begin with something pretty ordinary, a real, genuine issue that a few people start noticing. Stories get shared, examples get passed around, usually in circles where people already kind of think alike. And this is where the snowball effect really kicks in. As more people pay attention, you start seeing isolated cases get lumped together into a pattern. The most extreme or unusual examples suddenly become the poster child for the entire problem. And then people start actively looking for new examples that prove their worst fears are true. It's actually a lot like a little trick our brains play on us. I mean, think about this. Have you ever bought a new car or even just thought about buying one, and then suddenly you see that exact model everywhere you look? Did thousands of people rush out and buy that car overnight? Of course not. It's just a cognitive bias. Your brain has flagged it as important, so now it's pointing it out to you. And because we're noticing it and remembering it and talking about it so much more, it feels like it's happening more often. It feels like the problem is exploding, even if the actual number of times it's happening hasn't changed one bit. This isn't people being dishonest, it's just how our brains are wired. You can actually watch this shift happen in the words people use. So at the very beginning, the conversation is pretty grounded, it's factual, it's just an observation. Hey, this is happening. But then, as our focused attention makes it seem more common, the language starts to escalate. It's not just a thing that happens anymore. Now it's a growing problem. And then you hit the tipping point. The language becomes urgent, absolute. This is getting out of control. And at this stage, all the nuance is just gone. Complexity gets tossed out the window, and this feeling of crisis just takes over everything. And this whole process, from simple observation to full-blown crisis, is what sociologists call a moral panic. It's when a behavior that might have been around for ages is suddenly reframed as a brand new crisis, a sign that society is falling apart. And from that point on, policies aren't judged on whether they actually work, but on how tough they look. Okay, so what's the one critical mistake that really fuels this whole cycle of panic? Let's unpack what's called the visibility trap. This is the absolute heart of the matter, and it's a really simple but crucial distinction. We confuse something becoming more visible with it becoming more frequent. Just because something is suddenly easier to see and easier to talk about, and it feels like it's everywhere, that does not automatically mean it's actually happening more often. And that assumption right there, that more visibility means more frequency, that is the engine that drives the whole panic. That's the exact moment when a reasonable concern turns into a frantic demand for someone to just clamp down and make it stop. So what happens next? What are the real-world consequences when we make policy based on this visibility trap? Let's talk about the true cost of clamping down. Well, the response feels almost instinctual, right? If something feels out of control, the obvious answer is to get it back under control. So rules get tightened, penalties get way harsher, and overall tolerance for that behavior just shrinks to basically zero. The goal is simple: make the problem disappear entirely. But here's the thing. Behavior almost never just vanishes. When you force it out of the light, out of the regulated world, it just moves. It goes into the shadows. It turns into informal arrangements, unregulated spaces, clever workarounds. And worse, this often creates a market for criminals and leads to really dangerous power imbalances. You haven't solved the problem. You've just made it invisible and a whole lot riskier. Okay, so if that knee-jerk reaction of just clamping down on things so often backfires and makes things worse, what's the alternative? Is there a better way to handle this? Well, it turns out we have a fundamental choice between two very different paths. You've got the panic model, which is loud, it's driven by urgency, and it's all about punishment. And then you have the prevention model. It's quieter, it takes patience. It focuses on making things more visible, not less. And it's all about designing better systems in the first place. And what's so fascinating is that the evidence, whether you're looking at public health or crime prevention or child safety, it all points in the same direction. Systems that are built around early intervention, that encourage transparency so you can actually see problems, and that use social oversight, they just work better than systems based on pure punishment. And this isn't about being soft or looking the other way. This is just about smart, practical systems design. It turns out that when people have a real stake in their own future, when they have stable housing, good health care, and actual opportunities, a lot of the high-risk behaviors we try so hard to punish just start to decline on their own. Not because the laws got tougher, but because people finally had a better tomorrow to look forward to.
And really, it all boils down to one final, very practical question. If we can just accept the reality that certain human behaviors are probably always going to exist in some form, then the choice becomes pretty clear. Do we want that behavior happening out in the open, where it can be seen, where there can be oversight and support, or do we want to drive it into the shadows with all the hidden dangers that come with that? Once we start asking that question, the conversation can finally stop being about who's right or wrong and start being about what actually works.